Hello guys, around a month ago on my channel I started kind of a new tradition. So if you scroll down we see this, Tips and Tricks May edition. That was May edition for 1 month, compiled tips from Twitter about Laravel. So I decided to continue this tradition because that video was pretty popular. So today I have June version of 18 or so random tips on Laravel from Twitter, my own and from the community. So in no particular order, let's go rapid fire random Laravel tips. Tip number 1 from me: did you know that you can redirect with fragment, and that fragment is whatever you have after the hash symbol in the URL, which may automatically push your browser down below to the specific anchor on your page. So the user would continue on that part of the page. Tip number 2 comes from Osama. Here you can cache headers on the fly. So in the middleware, I actually zoom that in, you can have cache header and then list whatever you want, like public, max age, e-tag, or whatever you need. Simple, not much to add to this tweet. Tip number 3 comes from Laravel Backpack official Twitter handle, which is recently pretty active. Did you know that you can run Artisan commands not only from terminal, from your command line, but also call them directly from other functions in your Laravel project? Again, I will zoom that in. This is how it looks like. You just do Artisan call and whatever you want with parameters. The next tip comes from myself. It's about redirect to specific route or route name in this case. Since Laravel 9 you have a shorter helper, not just redirect route, but there's to route helper, which makes your code just a little bit shorter. This is one more way how Laravel has helpers to achieve the same thing in a bit different way. And some developers outside of Laravel community actually hate this part about Laravel, so many options to do the same things. And we will actually get back to this thought, this idea by the end of this video. But this is a short tip to route helper. The next tip, or actually kind of more global reminder idea, comes from Jason, creator of Laravel Shift. He's voting for using array functions in PHP instead of collections in Laravel. Sometimes it's a personal preference, but his example is, for example, array column function in PHP instead of collection plug in Laravel. And I talked about that quite a lot in my course. So I have a course called PHP for Laravel developers. I know it's a funny name, but I've seen many people starting with Laravel without really knowing PHP fundamentals, OOP and stuff like that. So one of the lessons in this course is about popular array functions with open source examples. So here's function is array, count, array merge, array filter, array push, and others. So in many cases, you don't need to convert to collections in Laravel, perform operations. PHP array functions are still powerful, still alive, and I will link this lesson with examples in the description below. The next tip is kind of a counter argument to Jason's tweet. We get back to collections. So Punyapal is showcasing us new methods in Laravel 11 release, and let's zoom that in again. So you can have before and after if you have a collection in Laravel. Not much to add here, just a few new helper methods in collections. The next tip comes from Mohammed, which is not that much about Laravel or even PHP. It's about architecture. You can create a special method in your model, for example, or whatever class, to hide the implementation of that method if you have a few conditions, and you may repeat that in multiple places. For example, call that from controller, from blade, from artisan command, or whatever. And this is partially about don't repeat yourself, DRY principle, but also it's more readable. For example, if you have this condition in controller, it's not that clear what it actually means. But if you have method name that contains the meaning of that condition, so is content unlocked, is much more readable for any new developer or even yourself in the future, instead of having this condition which isn't clear what that scheduled date means in real life scenario. So sometimes even if you have one condition here, and even if it's not that much repeated in the code base, a method with a better name is a better solution for readability. Again, sometimes, it's your personal preference, and I'm planning to shoot a separate video expanding on that tell, don't ask principle in coding architecture. The next tip comes from me again. By the way, I still post those tips almost every day on Twitter, so you can follow me there. And the tip is about DD. So instead of having DD on a new line, did you know that in Eloquent, you can DD the collection on the same line? Or if that line gets too long, of course, you can split different parts like get on the new line, dd on a new line, and whatever else you have as conditions. The next tip comes from Osama, formatting to percentages. Number class was released, from what I remember, in Laravel 10, some minor version of Laravel 10, and I have a separate video about that, and I will link that in the description below. So one of those methods of that number class is percentage. So if you have any number from your database, for example, you can format that with precision or with max precision, or even down to locale to format that with comma, for example, in this case for German language. The next tip comes from Aniket, and I've never had a case of using the controller in this way, but it's pretty interesting. For example, if you want to have some of the methods of the controller public, like index and show, while others would be private under middleware auth. So this would be a potential code, the same route resource used twice, but with only and except specifying the methods. Personally, I'm not sure I would use it this way. I would probably separate them into separate controllers, like namespace of user event controller and admin event controller, or something like that, or public versus user. But this is an interesting code example that you can divide the controller with only and except and provide different group, different middleware, or other parameters to that route group. The next tip comes from Steve, or it's not actually even a tweet, it's a full Artisan command of how to handle invoice sending, for example, and showing the live update progress bar in your terminal. So it's based on two things: bus batch and then create progress bar, and then setting the progress based on the batch processed jobs. So you should try something like that yourself, this code snippet changed for your project, and see how that progress bar actually looks like. I do have a video showcasing something like that, and I will link that in the description below as well. The next tip comes from Martin, who is talking about service classes in Laravel or in PHP. So for a lot of newcomer developers, I know it's confusing to have service classes, what they are, how to use them, and what should be inside of the service class in Laravel. And Martin kind of simplifies that, showcasing the example and how to use it in a thread. I will not read the full thread for you, I will instead link that in the description below. But basically the idea is that service class is any PHP class that you would reuse elsewhere. The next tip is not about Laravel, it's about PHP, and it comes from Pascal. Did you know, I didn't know that match can work with two values. So you can match a pair of values and then based on that perform some operation. So this would help you avoid a lot of if statements, if this then that, and then if something else. This is much more readable. The next tip, again about PHP, comes from Punyapal here, and it's about PHP 8.4, the upcoming version. We will have more methods with array, getting back to the topic we already talked about earlier in this video. So you can see the example: array find key, array any, and array all. Should be pretty good additions to PHP syntax. The next tip comes from Liam, and it is for preventing N+1 query problem in your Laravel projects by preventing lazy loading in your app service provider. This comes from app service provider file, but Liam suggests one step further. So if app is in production, prevent lazy loading should not throw an exception, but instead you can override how it is doing the prevention with the method handle lazy loading violation using a long name, but it does exactly what it says. And you can, for example, log something somewhere or send some notification to someone. That's your personal choice, but basically no exception. The query still goes through, but you can inform someone. The last tip for this video comes from myself, and this is where I told you we would get back to the topic of many options in Laravel to do the same thing. To be honest, I tweet this from time to time, every few months or so, as a reminder that there are multiple ways how to call the view from the controller and how to pass the data. You can pass an array, you can pass an array as a variable, or you can use compact function. And each time I tweet about it, there are around 100 likes or 200 likes with a lot of replies of which option is preferred. So a lot of discussions around the same topic of many options in Laravel. And this is exactly where I want to end this video with the last not tip but a link. On Twitter, I've posted an article from Reddit where someone is switching from Laravel to Rails. This is a very interesting discussion, and what that person pointed out as one of the downsides of Laravel is exactly that instability and no one clear way, one clear best practice to do the same thing, including the fact that some new helpers arrive, new ways to do the same thing, which kind of loses the consistency of the framework. Personally, I see that as a feature of Laravel, not a bug, maybe even kind of a trademark Laravel feature showcasing the flexibility of the framework, but in this case, the opinion of that person is downside, so I will link the tweet and Reddit thread in the description below. This is a very good write-up of downsides of Laravel, but in a very polite way, in a very non-negative way. Pretty interesting read. And the final thing in this video, if you want to follow people on Twitter for Laravel tips, in Laravel daily menu resources there is people to follow, where I link to a lot of people from Laravel community who tweet about Laravel or used to tweet about Laravel, including Taylor and others. So you can find someone to follow on Twitter in this list. I will also link that in the description below. What do you think about this format of monthly rapid-fire Twitter tips? Should I continue with the next episode in the next month? Let me know in the comments below. That's it for this time, and see you guys in other videos.